They walked me out of a building I had given 15 years to on a Thursday at 10 in the morning, while everyone around me pretended to be busy. The kid carrying the second box behind me was the one I had spent all summer teaching to do my job. He did not know that yet, I did. My manager stood by the elevator with his hands in his pockets, and he told me the role was fully documented now, that nobody here was irreplaceable. And he said it like he was handing me a gift. There was one thing I had put in writing that spring, one plain warning in a plain email, that every person in that building would be repeating back to me before the leaves came down. I'm going to tell you what that warning was, and what it cost the man who deleted it, right down to the office he thought he was about to get. If you have ever made yourself small and useful and quiet because somebody promised you that loyalty gets rewarded, if you have ever been laid off by a manager who smiled while he did it, then you already know the sound my badge made when it stopped opening the door. I was the person who kept the Meridian account running, and I had been that person for a very long time. Meridian was our biggest client by a mile, and if they ever walked, half the floor walked with them. Most of what I did was invisible, which is the whole trick of a job like mine, because when I did it right, nothing happened. And nothing happening looks an awful lot like doing nothing. Let me tell you one small thing about who I was back then, because it matters later. When a younger analyst on my team sent a bad file over to Muridiso one Friday and went white at his desk, I called their side, took the blame myself, and had it fixed before lunch, and his name never came up. That was the rule I lived by. The one my father handed me. He gave 40 years to a paper mill, and he used to say, "Make yourself useful and keep your head down, and they will take care of their own." He believed that right up until the mill closed and a man half his age handed him a folder in the parking lot. I stood at his funeral still believing it for the both of us. So I was loyal, and I was quiet, and I put everything in writing, because a paper trail was the closest thing I had to a backbone. They used to joke about it in the office, that I copied half the planet on every email, that I still had messages saved from 2009. Remember that about me. His name was Gavin, and he had been made our director of operations about 18 months earlier, which meant he had never once done the work he was now in charge of. Gavin talked about the team the way a man talks about a car he is trying to sell you. That spring he called me into his office and told me we were growing, that he wanted to bring on someone junior for me to mentor, to spread the knowledge around, to get things out of my head and onto paper. He said the word mentor like it was a present with a bow on it. Her name was Priya, 23 years old, first real job, sharp as anything and terrified of getting something wrong. I liked her right away. I taught her everything, the way you teach somebody you think is going to be sitting beside you for the next 10 years. I stayed late building her guides that were better than anything I'd ever bothered to write for myself. And somewhere in the third week, watching Gavin look at the floor every time he passed my desk, I finally understood what I was actually doing. I was not building a bigger team. I was training the person who would do my job for half of what they paid me. Could have slowed down or gone home sick or done what a lot of tired men do and let the work rot a little to prove that I mattered. I did the opposite. I wrote the cleanest handover that company had ever seen, and right in the middle of it I put one warning in bold, because it was the single thing that could actually hurt the client. I will keep this part simple because it is the whole story. Meridian's entire system trusted us through a security certificate that had to be renewed by hand once a year on a hard date. And that renewal could only be approved by one person. Meridian had signed off on years before. That person was me. My name, not my job title, was the key. And you cannot copy a key like that into a document. Has to be handed over slowly with the client's blessing. And that takes about 4 weeks. So in April, I wrote all of it down in an email, in plain words. I wrote that the certificate was due in the middle of September, that the approval was tied to me personally on Murition's side, and that Priya had to be registered and verified with Murition before my last day. The renewal would simply fail. I copied Gavin. I copied his boss. And I copied my contact over at Murition, a man named Ruiz, who had worked beside me for 9 years. I asked in writing for a signed confirmation that the handover was complete before they let me go. I wanted it on the record for them and for me. Gavin answered that email with one line. He wrote, "Appreciate the diligence, but this role is fully documented and transferable, and nobody here is irreplaceable. So we will proceed as planned." He copied everyone back when he wrote it. He was so sure he was right that he put it in writing too. They let me go in the first week of August in a meeting that lasted 11 minutes. Gavin used the word restructure 4 times and my name twice. They pulled my access off the certificate before I had even left. Killed it that same Thursday, the day 2 men walked me out with my 2 boxes. Bree was never registered with Muriion because registering her would have meant admitting that the thing Gavin had put in writing was wrong. Walking to my car, I knew a clock had just started. I did not yet know how far down I would be by the time it ran out. The first month, I told myself it was a gift. All that free time, and I updated my resume like it was going to save me. 15 years running. The account that kept the lights on, and recruiters would go quiet the second they did the math on my age from my dates. One of them actually said it out loud, gently, the way you tell a hard thing to a slow child, that the market was really looking for people earlier in their journey. I started shaving 2 jobs off my history to look younger on paper. And then I sat in the driveway feeling sick about it before I could make myself go inside. My wife started doing the thing where she keeps her voice very level, which is how I always know she is scared. There was a number in our savings account that used to feel like solid ground, and I watched it go down like a tide heading out. My daughter Emma had a spot at a school 4 hours away, and I had promised her out loud more than once that the money was handled. I sat her down in August and heard myself telling her that maybe we should look at the community college for a year, just 1 year. And I watched her nod and say that was totally fine while she stared at the kitchen table. That was the one that took the air out of me, not the mortgage, not the calls from the card company. That I started applying for jobs I had personally trained other people to do, and I got nothing back, not even a no. One night I drove out to a warehouse that was hiring for the overnight shift, and I sat in the lot for 40 minutes and could not make myself walk in, and I did not really understand why until I was home. It was because the second I walked in there, the last 15 years were gone, like they had never counted for anything at all. My father always said they take care of their own, and I finally understood that I had spent my whole life being other people's own, and not once had anybody thought of me as theirs. There were a couple of weeks in there I do not talk about much, where I stopped answering the phone and stopped shaving and mostly sat in the car in empty parking lots, because the car was the one place left that did not expect anything from me. I had one thing I kept in the top drawer folded once sitting next to my father's watch. It was a printout of that April email with Gavin's one line printed underneath it. I could not have told you why I kept it where I would see it every morning. Maybe some part of me that was not ready to talk yet already knew what it was for. The middle of September came, and I knew the exact date before I would let myself think about it. Briddy unhandled the health enrollment for half the state, and the 14th of September was the day their sign-up opened to the public. The one day all year the whole thing had to work. On the morning of the 14th, Teridian went dark, not slow, not glitchy dark, in front of 200,000 people trying to sign up and a news crew already set up in the lobby. The certificate had expired 1 minute after midnight, exactly the way I said it would, and there was no one left in that building with the authority to renew it, because they had driven that authority out to the parking lot in a cardboard box 6 weeks earlier. My phone rang at 9:40 that morning. It was Gavin. He had not said a single word to me in 6 weeks, and now his voice was doing something I had never once heard it do. He said they had a situation, that they really needed my help, that I understood the Muri'iun setup better than anyone alive, and could I please come in today, right now? I sat at my kitchen table and let the silence run long enough that I could hear him breathing on the other end. Then I told him I did not work there anymore. I told him that if the company wanted to hire a consultant, the company could send me something in writing with a number on it, and I would look at it like any other job. The paper came within the hour because a room full of people who had spent all spring calling me replaceable were now watching the money leave by the hour. The rate I wrote down was 4 times what they used to pay me by the day, and they signed it without a word. I want to be honest about one thing. because this is the part people get wrong about revenge. I did not have a plan yet. I just knew for the first time in 6 weeks that I was the one holding the thing they needed, and I was not about to hand it over cheap or fast. I walked back into that building through the front door as a consultant, past the same guard, and this time I was not carrying a box. It took me most of a day and 2 long calls with Ruiz on the Murillo side to rebuild the trust and get the certificate renewed, because it had to be done in my name again, since mine was still the only name their system had ever trusted. Sit with that for a second. The entire disaster existed for exactly one reason: that my name was the key, which was the exact thing I had written down in April, and the exact thing Gavin had called documented and transferable. While I worked, I did the thing I have always done. I wrote down every step and every tump, and I noted plainly that the renewal had failed because the only authorized contact had been removed with no replacement registered. As flagged on the 9th of April, I was not trying to be clever. I was just being the exact man they had trained me to be, and this time it had teeth. This is where Gavin made his real mistake, the one that actually finished him. He could have let it be a bad week, a hard lesson, a line in a report. Instead, with Murillo unscreaming and his own jump to vice president due to be announced within weeks, he needed that outage to be somebody else's fault. So he picked me. Got back to me through Pre-U, who called me crying on the second night that Gavin was telling the people upstairs that the former employee had left the handover a mess, that I had sat on critical information out of spite, maybe even broke it on purpose. On my way out the door, Priya said she had tried to tell them that was not true, that she had never been registered with Murillo on at all, and that Gavin had quietly told her to be very careful about what she thought she remembered. I told her to write down everything she remembered, put a date on it, send it to herself at home, and stop arguing with him out loud. Then I went to the drawer, took out the folded printout and set it on the kitchen table, and I looked at it for a long time. The next morning I went to pull the April warning out of the company's ticket system, the shared record everyone could see, so I would have it ready. It was gone. The ticket was closed and wiped, and the email thread it linked to had been deleted out of the company, archived with Gavin's name, sitting on the last change. For about a minute at that kitchen table, I was the man in the parking lot again, because now it was my word against the directors, and I knew exactly how that story ends. For the guy with no job and a grudge. Then I looked down at the page, still sitting on my table from the night before. Back in April, the same day I sent that email, I had printed the whole thing and printed his reply under it the next morning and signed and dated the bottom. Because that is what my father's son does. Gavin could delete the copy on the company's servers, because the company owned those. He could not walk into my kitchen and pull the page out of my drawer. And he could not touch the copy sitting in Ruiz's box over at Murillo, where it had been since the 9th of April. On servers Gavin could not reach into if his life depended on it. 2 copies of the thing he had just erased, in 2 places he could never get to. I made 5 more that night, and I did not tell a soul. 3 weeks after the outage, Murillo called a meeting to decide whether they were staying or walking, and whether anybody was going to pay for what that day had cost them. They put it in the biggest room in the building, the one with the glass wall facing the street. Murillo sent 4 of their leadership with Ruiz down at the end of the table. Our side sent Gavin and our chief operating officer, a woman named El Anur, who signed off on every promotion in the building and had never once bothered to learn my name. And they had brought me in, the consultant, to explain the technical timeline because I was the one who had fixed it. Gavin thought he had set the whole table. He had already fed El Anur his version in private. A disgruntled former employee, the botched handover. And he walked into that room the way you walk in when you are sure the hard part is behind you. He spoke first. He was good, I will give him that much. He said the outage came down to a single point of failure. One employee who had left without properly transferring critical knowledge. And he was very sorry, and the company had already taken steps to make sure it could never happen again. He did not look at me one time while he said it. He even used the word again right there in the room. that the old way of doing things had leaned too hard on people who thought they were irreplaceable, and that he had put a stop to that. Ruiz looked at me from the end of the table, and I gave him nothing back, because I did not need to. Then El Aner asked me to walk everyone through the technical timeline. That was all I needed. I did not raise my voice. I opened a plain paper folder and said I would keep it to the dates. I said the renewal that failed on the 14th of September had exactly one authorized approver on Muridio's side, and I asked Ruiz straight across the table whether that was correct. Ruiz said it was, and he said the name on that authorization was mine and had been mine for 9 years. I said this exact risk had been put in writing on the 9th of April, and I slid the first page into the middle of the table. I read it out loud. The part where I wrote that the renewal would fail if a new approver was not registered before my last day, 4 weeks minimum. With the client signing off, Gavin said he had never seen it. So I slid the second page across the table. It was his own reply, from the 10th of April, copied to El Aner and to Ruiz. In his own words, I read it to the room slowly, every word. Appreciate the diligence, but this role is fully documented and transferable. And nobody here is irreplaceable, so we will proceed as planned. Then I said quietly that this same email had been deleted off the company servers on the 21st of September, and the ticket wiped the same afternoon, and that I could show them the account that did it if anyone wanted to see it. I never said his name. I did not have to, because every head at that table had already turned toward the one man who had a reason to make an April email disappear in the fall. Then Ruiz reached into his own bag and set his copy of that same email on the table. The one that had been sitting on Muridion's servers the entire time untouched, and slid it right next to mine. 2 copies of the thing Gavin swore he had never seen from 2 different companies, with the exact same dates. El Aner did not say anything for a long moment. Then she asked Gavin, in a very even voice, to explain the 21st of September. And Gavin, the man who was going to be a vice president by the end of the month, opened his mouth, and nothing came out that helped him. He was not a vice president by the end of the month. There was an internal review, the kind a company only runs when a client is holding a knife to its throat. Leading records in the middle of that kind of review is the one thing even a company like that cannot pretend it did not see. They walked Gavin out on a Tuesday, and I'm told he carried 1 box, and I'm told not a single person looked up from their desk. And I did not feel the thing I always thought I would feel about that. Mostly I thought about my father, standing in a parking lot with a folder in his hands. Muridio stayed on one condition that Ruiz put down in plain writing, that I was the one who ran their account, whether I did it from inside that company or from my own. So I did it from my own. I registered as a consultant. Muridio became my first client, and the rate I had scrawled down in a panic that first morning turned out to be the floor and not the ceiling. Priya came to work with me about 8 months later, once she finally clawed her way out from under all of it, and the first thing I did was register her with Muridio properly, the way it should have been done in the first place, so that if I ever get walked out of my own company, the key does not leave with me. Emma started at that school 4 hours away the next fall, and I paid the deposit out of an account with my own company's name on it, and I never told her how close it came. I kept the folded printout. It is still in the top drawer, next to my father's watch, except now I know exactly what it was for. My father was wrong about the one thing he was surest of, and it cost me 51 years and 1 cardboard box to find that out. Nobody takes care of their own. They keep the people they cannot afford to lose, and the morning they decide they can afford to lose you. 15 loyal years turned into 1 line on a spell. Being useful kept me fed for a while, but it never once kept me safe. And the day a manager hands you some bright young kid and asks you sweetly to train your replacement, that is not him growing the team. That is him telling you the meter is already running. So let me ask you something and be honest, because nobody here can see your face. If your boss told you tomorrow to get everything in your head down onto paper for the new hire, would you smile and do it, or would you finally start keeping your own copies? If you have ever had to train your replacement, been walked out of a place you gave your best years to tell me, Down in the comments the one thing you wish you had put in writing. Stay a while. I collect these, the stories about the quiet ones who got pushed 1 inch too far and finally stopped being polite. There is another one already waiting for you, and I think you already know you are going to press play.